Everybody, welcome to What the Flick. Bibbs, Alonso, Taboo, Episode 2. Apparently, it's just called Episode 2.
Yeah.
Near as I can tell.
I think they should be named after all of the movies in the Taboo franchise.
Don't even start.
No? Okay.
No.
Taboo 2 was the name.
No, we're not talking about that. Okay, so this was an entire hour to basically tell us that the dead dad maybe had a wife who might throw a monkey into the wrench. And that's kind of all that happened.
Let me ask you a question, because I wasn't here last week.
Yes.
I watched the first 2 episodes back to back, and I watched them off of Amazon. So are you watching this like on network television with like the commercial break? I cannot imagine how disjointed the show must feel if it cuts to a commercial. Well, because it's so quiet and it's so purposeful. And then the idea that all of a sudden there's a Geico commercial would just completely wreck everything the show is trying to do.
Well, maybe I should start watching it on Amazon then, because it runs like these are hour 28, time slots we're talking here. So I guess this is just a solid hour uninterrupted. Is that how it works?
I guess.
Okay, yeah. I was informed by someone that it's a BBC drama. So it's a very big deal for Tom Hardy to be doing a BBC drama.
Well, I mean, Tom Hardy was on, it's not the same thing, but Tom Hardy was on Peaky Blinders,
yes,
which is a great show.
Yes.
But Peaky Blinders is much more like the train spotting version of this. There's a lot of incident, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of youthful vitality and rage and anger and violence. And this is like, I don't know. This is like a Melville story that's kind of getting out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still on board. I found this episode a little plotting, and maybe the commercials play the difference. I don't know. I mean, okay, some other stuff did happen. There's further stuff with the sister.
Yes, we're getting more into the idea that they had a love affair.
Yes, which I think was the show's been pretty clear about.
It's in the title.
It's a taboo. And we have the East India Company, I mean...
Stabbing him.
Right, sending out an actual hired assassin. But I was surprised that the East India Company didn't set up the wife. Like, they were sort of surprised by her, too. So it's like, okay, well then, maybe she's real?
That's oddly soap operatic.
Yeah.
For how the show was set up. And this sort of very moody, very plausible...
Occasionally borderline mystical...
Yeah, maybe, but it's that sort of general, plausible deniability kind of way. That's a very broad plot point. It's very Dickensian all of a sudden, and I don't know. Like I don't trust it either. But I looked at IMDb. She's around.
Okay.
Like we're sticking with her for a bit, so I guess that's a thing.
I did love
I feel like that's a plot point from Avonlea that got left over, but all right.
I did love the moment of the reading of the will where all the creditors show up and he's like, here's your money, get in line.
It's a very young Pope thing to do.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
I will say this, Tom Hardy makes it work. He's very convincing.
This falls in that category of almost no other actor in this role would make this thing nearly as interesting.
Yeah, and you can hear his voice, which is often rather gravelly, but he's getting to Ray Winstone level. Like he's slowly turning into Ray Winstone, which is actually pretty cool. We had he buys a boat in this episode. He finds out it was used for the slave trade, so he just fucking burns it.
Right.
So he's obviously a moral individual, but he's also moral by personal experience, not being moral. Because we've had those fantasies. I don't have time for guilt right now. I don't have time for shame. Come back later.
Right, he's been there for sure. I liked the scene with the Thoit, the lawyer that he has the conversation
about. Yes, Thoit is the lawyer.
About the slave trade that the East India Company was involved in. He was like, what? No, they just transport fabric or whatever. It reminded me of. And as a musical theater geek, you'll appreciate the Molasses to Rum to Slaves number from 1776, where they talk about how, what? No, we just import the molasses. It was like, no, it's a triangle, folks.
Yeah.
Those, the New Englanders could be snotty about Southern slavery, but there's whose boats you think are bringing those guys back?
The theory that Jonathan Pryce put forth, I'm trying to remember if it was at the end of the last episode or the beginning of this episode, that the Americans got to him.
That's this episode.
That's this episode. Okay, because I watched them together. It blurred a little bit. The Americans have gotten to him.
Yes.
Because everything he's doing really is in America's best interest, at least right now, at least on the outside observer.
And of course, the American, we always make the joke, there are 5 actors on television who have to play everything. The American spy is the guy from House of Cards.
There you go. But at the same time, I'm wondering, how accurate is that? How, because is he just the thorn in the side of the corporation? Is he that kind of hero? That kind of person who has seen the world, comes back, has no interest, that sort of Batman or Robin Hood Prince of Thieves type? Or is he actually a cog in a larger machine, whether or not he's aware of it or whether or not he's comfortable with it?
Or is there a long game?
Ooh.
Because obviously we do have that scene with the king this episode where it's clear that he's ready to stab the East India Company in the back at any moment, even though the East India Company, publicly at least, or to James is saying, no, the king and the corporation are, they work together.
Right.
So it could be a thing where Hardy's character is intentionally setting all the players against each other for sheer chaos, like Heath Ledger's Joker, or because ultimately he profits somehow.
Without the sort of extremity of plot, what Taboo is doing right now reminds me an awful lot kind of the actual spaghetti westerns. Not so much the Sergio Leone stuff, but like the Sergio Corbucci, Django stuff, where it's basically just
Terrence Hill, Bud Spencer movies.
Yeah, well, not even that. I'm thinking about the ones that just take the Old West, taking a time period that we look back on as somewhat exotic or principled, and just say, what the fucked up. And the scene with the king reminded me of that, or the Prince Regent, I guess he is. He's so grotesque. He's like Harkonnen in Dune. Like he's just. His face is all messed up. It looks like he's got gout. Like he's not. There's something wrong here, and it's like all the evils of the realm are conspiring
manifest in his body,
are manifesting to make this person who just looks like exactly what he is.
Right.
There's something that's so in your face about this show, saying how wrong was society, and kind of always has been, I guess. Sure. But like we can't even look back at this show about a guy who's standing up to the East India Company, which had a variety of moral and ethical problems. Yeah. We can't even this show has to be oppressively disgusting at times. Like what do we get out of that? Because it's not done with the sense of entertainment in mind.
Well, I mean,
not broad entertainment.
I think. I don't know that it's news to anybody that there has always been greed and there has always been sort of like corporate / political machinations. Like I think I don't think that contemporary audiences have illusions about anything. I think that every sort of belle époque of the past has had that rock turned over and found the slimy side underneath. So I'm thinking that that the Hardys, because this is created by Tom Hardy and his father Chips Hardy, which is my favorite name ever. I think they're more interested in this character. And this character in this very sort of specific era of history, I don't think they feel like they're ripping the lid off of this era of history, but I think that it's providing an interesting context. Again, this whole notion about like when corporate interests and government interests clash, who wins and who decides who wins, that's still very contemporary.
That's still very contemporary. And yet I feel like if all of these themes that they're discussing are going to have any impact, you got to drive them home at some point.
Well, yeah.
You can't have like apathy when you're dealing with corruption.
Yes,
like,
but it's episode 2.
I know, but this is my point. In episode 2, we meet the Prince Regent and he's Harkonnen.
Right.
That's sort of shoving it in your face. Like this is the only way we can get it across just how wicked this is.
True. Although that might just be a matter of historical accuracy. That no, this guy really was, I don't know what is going on there, but to portray him otherwise would be a historical fallacy, and so they have to lay all those cards on the table because anybody who knows that this guy looked like that. I myself don't know, but I'm just saying that's a possibility.
When you tell historical fiction, you choose repeatedly what's going to be 100% accurate, what's going to be partially accurate just because of practicalities of production, what's going to be distracting if we make it accurate.
Right.
For example, they're using a lot of contemporary language, not distractingly slangy contemporary language, but they're not using the dialogue of the day because that would be a little distracting on FX. Yeah. So they make these choices. I just think it's interesting the choices that they've made, and I'm wondering how it affects not just the plot of the movie, show. I'm usually a film critic. And not just how the plot of the show, but the actual tone and the theme, because right now, the show is very much tone. The show is very much theme. The plot hasn't really accelerated yet.
No, all true. And speaking of plot, we should mention Winter, the young mulatto, that's a word you don't hear anymore.
Nope.
Who is ostensibly the daughter of the madam played by Franca Potente, who is warning James about the the silver-toothed man who's going to be killing him or trying to.
Yes.
So she's one of the few likable characters this show has felt like coughing up so far.
She comes up so mysteriously. For a while, I wondered if she was real because Tom Hardy keeps saying he has information because his father shouted it over the ocean.
Oh, right. That's
so. Like, I was wondering, like, is she like some sort of like manifestation of some sort? Like, how deeply are we going to get into the mysticism of the show? Because it's obviously a factor. His beliefs, his paganism, is in sharp relief.
That he knew to show up for the funeral. Like, clearly there's something going on here.
There's something going on, and whether or not the show ever directly confronts that, or whether they just let it be in the background, let it smooth over some of the plot points. Like, how do we get him to his father's funeral? Like, just in time when he was across the ocean. I don't know, mysticism?
Voices.
Mysticism. We'll just say mysticism. We'll make it an undercurrent.
They could keep it on a slow simmer. We'll see. I think at some point, modern audiences get restless and they want some concrete answers, and hopefully the show will be smart enough to give us some.
I think in the post-Lost era, showrunners are a little afraid not to give us answers.
This is true. Yes. Stephen Knight is writing here, which, as I mentioned last week, I'm a big fan of Locke, but not so much of a lot of his other non-Tom Hardy projects.
Locke is fantastic. I thought Dirty Pretty Things was pretty fantastic.
That's a good one, yes.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a great game show that he co-created.
Yes, but
and Peaky Blinders kicks ass. I love Peaky Blinders.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, his Tom Hardy projects, like I said, are on point. I could do without any more Burnts.
I didn't see Burn.
Woo.
I did not see Burn. And didn't he write Allied as well? I didn't see that.
I
think he did.
Yeah, not good.
Well, he's very prolific, so he's going to have a lot of hits and misses.
And the 100-foot journey or whatever.
I also didn't see that. Yeah. I had him on my podcast last year, and we talked about Burnt and the 100-foot journey. You actually insisted that I ask.
Well, yeah, because they're both movies about people getting a third Michelin star. I'm like, two movies about this same thing? Come on, man.
Yeah, and he was like, I don't know. It just sort of happened. It's weird.
Anyway, well, now he's doing this, and this is a whole nother thing.
I'm digging it, but it's definitely like we talk about how the Pope is kind of a young Pope is kind of a slow burn. But the young Pope has a bit more drive than this does. This is kind of luxuriating.
A little bit.
In its stickiness.
Yeah.
And I'm digging it, but I'm wondering how long it's going to take before I lose my patience.
I am reminded of Chevy Chase in the first Vacation movie saying, "Kids, you experiencing all this squalor?" No, blight. Kids, all this blight. There's a lot of blight on this show, and I think maybe we could get a little more story going.
Time to move on.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Let's get back to the actual taboo part of Taboo.
Well,
I just mean the show promises
it's in the title. You're right.
Like stuff that goes against society and ethics and morality, and we're not seeing a lot of that yet.
Maybe there will be cannibalism next week.
Ooh, we did bite a guy in the neck.
Yeah.
That's fun.
They're
it's going to be hard to explain to the cops.
All right. More Taboo next week. Thanks for joining us.